Happy New Year, guys. How are you? Welcome to 2021. I'm talking about the economic progressive reforms that happened during the progressive era. Remember, again, the progressive era is the longest social reform movement in American history. All right. And I'm going to focus on the economics of it. So, one background for the economics of it is much of what occurs during the progressive era harkens back to the populist era. So, if you remember the Omaha Platform, many of the things that the populists wanted, i.e., the farmers of the western and southern United States, they will get most of these things in the progressive era. In fact, much of the Omaha Platform is passed in different parts. So the key to this is Teddy Roosevelt. All right. Teddy Roosevelt was the first president that took over. And as you can see, unlike the presidents from 1865 to 1900, he hated the impact of big business in government. He thought that government should be in control. He called it the bully pulpit. So the Sherman Antitrust Act, which had already been passed back in 1890, however, had been mostly used against unions, are now being used against who they were intended to be used again, which were the trusts. And he became known as the trust buster, okay, breaking up all of these massive trusts that had accumulated from the industrial era. Again, remember that the progressive era is a reaction to industrialization, okay? He was also a huge proponent of conservation, but Miss Ulrich has taken that part of it, all right? Now, one thing where you're going to see a change between Roosevelt and his successors is Roosevelt thought it was up to him as president of the United States to determine what the good trusts were and what the bad trusts were. So if he didn't like a trust, he went after it. But he did allow some trusts to exist that will not continue under Taft and Wilson. Okay, and that's a very famous cartoon. There's a bear hunting story behind that. But also you can see that Roosevelt wanted to put government back in control of the country where he believed it should be. Okay. All right. This entire program and Roosevelt's entire program is called the Square Deal. Probably not as famous as his second cousin's New Deal, which we will discuss in a couple of weeks, but it's a good term to know. Control of the corporations, consumer protection, and conservation, the three C's, if you will. All right. And so make sure that, that's a great way if you're writing an essay to kind of organize your essay in terms of this, okay? Now, the one example your book gives of the Square Deal is the coal miner strike or the Square Deal for labor. And for the first time, the government didn't come down on the side of labor, okay? He did not support labor, but he forced labor and corporations to come and talk and basically threaten to shut down the mines and send in the National Guard to run the mines. And he basically forced business to acknowledge that labor was a participant in the system. And this is a huge shot in the arm for the labor movement in terms of allowing them a seat at the table, basically. All right. So, but this overall, his program was called the Square Deal. So he went after, remember, the farmers hated the railroads. He went after the railroads with the Elkins and Hepburn Act. The Elkin Act disallowed those rebates that the farmers so hated because they were always given to big business. And the ICC, which had been set up in the 1890s, basically got to set the rates. So those pools that were so hated were basically taken down. After Roosevelt becomes president, and again, it's really important in the progressive era to know that there are three progressive presidents: Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson. All three are from different parties: two Republicans, one Democrat. All right, so this is a big movement. Taft, his big thing was the 16th Amendment. Okay, this is the income tax, and this is going to slowly replace the main function of making money for the government, which has been tariffs during the 19th century. So this is a major change in the 20th century. Tariffs, which we've talked about a ton, and I'll talk about again in a minute here, were how the federal government made money. But now income tax is going to be the primary driver of government income. So he passes the 16th Amendment, and this is a graduated income tax, which meant you paid a certain amount depending on how much you made. all right, which is still the system that we still have today. Okay, this was mainly shaped at this time at producing more equality between the very, 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 very rich and everybody else. Taft does not get credit at all, but he was a much better trust buster than Roosevelt. He busted more trusts in 4 years than Roosevelt did in 7. But a good term, especially if you're remembering a pebble for your essays, is Standard Oil. Okay, Taft broke up Standard Oil, which was the biggest, baddest trust of them all in 1911. Broke it up into many different companies, and also he went after U.S. Steel, although he eventually never was able to actually break up U.S. Steel. This also is what angered Roosevelt, which is why Roosevelt will come back and run against Taft in 1912. And then finally, you get the last of the progressive presidents, Woodrow Wilson. He focused on business as the other two did, but he also focused on labor. He is the one who brings in that tariff reform. He drastically reduces tariffs for the first time in 50 years. Part of this is because it makes American companies more competitive, and America is now the largest industrial power in the world. And if you are the largest industrial power, you don't need tariffs. But the other reason was it also brought down consumer prices, because if you're charging tariffs, that tax is passed on to the consumer. So this made the cost of living lower, which was a very good thing. And this was the Underwood tariff. This also then was replaced by an increase in the income tax, which is going to be, again, a continuing theme in the 20th century. He also set up something that's incredibly important. If you do Wilson, always remember this fact. All right, here's your history. The Federal Reserve Act. The Federal Reserve Act is still the way the government basically controls the money supply. If you remember, during the populist era, it was controlling it between gold and silver, and the populists wanted to increase silver. Now the Federal Reserve Act can basically use interest rates and other techniques to basically make the interest rate go up or down depending on where the government economic situation is. He also, and this is critical, passed the Clayton Antitrust Act. This basically made the replaced the Sherman Antitrust Act. It clarified some of the provisions of the Clayton or the Sherman Antitrust Act. The Clayton Antitrust Act is still in effect today. It has just been used in the last month against Google and Facebook, and will probably be unleashed against a couple of the other tech companies. So it's really important to understand. And now the government actually has a tool to actually go against illegal trusts without going against labor unions, which it had initially been used for. And then finally, he went after child labor. He basically forbid the sale of products across state lines. However, and this is very interesting, and AP loves this, so remember this, that was declared unconstitutional in the court case Hammer versus Dagenhart. That's a great term if you can remember it, because basically they said that they couldn't connect child labor to interstate trade. They went back and tried to correct these child labor laws. However, basically mandatory school is what took care of child labor. So this is a time when basically, for the fact that you guys are now in school until you're 18, mandatory high school, this basically took the problem of child labor away. All right. So those are the economic impacts of the progressive era. This is a major, major change in American society, guys. All right. Have a great day.